Hi there. Today I'm going to paint this bollette mushroom. The lovely chunky shapes, and they remind me of when I used to work in France and in the Périgord Dordogne region. So that brings back nice memories, and they're found in the forests of the Dordogne and other places around the world. So the paper I'm using is cold pressed, £140. You can use any surface though. I just use the cold press to have a bit more texture. Then the colours I'm going to use, they're all Winsor Newton Professional tube watercolour, like this. Okay, they're not the student grade, they're not called Winsor Newton COTMAN. Okay, COTMAN's the student grade and it's got more filler in it. So these are the professional quality, and they last a lot better, and they're just better all around, obviously. So the colours I'm going to use are raw umber, then burnt sienna, Winsor yellow, and French ultramarine blue. Then I've just made a little mix of raw umber with French ultramarine blue, and it gives it a lovely soft grey, and I'll be using that in these mushrooms as well. So the brushes I'm using, I'll probably use no more than these. I've got actually 2 rounds. They're synthetic. I don't buy expensive brushes. These do the job really quite well. These are actually Ken Bromley Value brushes. I've got a size 6 and a size 4. And then I've got actually it's an acrylic brush. This is a short flat brush. It's not very long, it's quite stubby. And that's good for lifting out highlights. And then another brush that I might need as well is, bear with me a sec, sorry, is this one. It's a slightly wider flat brush. That's probably 1/4 inch, this is probably roughly 1/2 inch, and they're great for lifting out highlights that I may need. Okay, so let's get going. If I can just show you my palette here. If I zoom out a bit. This is a Frank Webb lidded palette, and it's great because you don't waste any paint. You know, the paint stays in there for weeks and weeks, and you just spray it every night with a spray. Keep the paint moist, okay? So my colours are there ready. I've got a nice mixing area. So first of all, I'm just going to moisten my brush and wet the whole of the inside of the mushroom. Okay, I'm doing this because I want the paint to be able to go on softly and to bleed. So the paint will only go where I wet the paper, it won't flow anywhere else, okay? So you've got a bit of control. Just wet the whole thing. This is a piece of old paper, by the way. On the back of it's another demo I did. Initially I stretched it, you know, soaking it in a tub of water and then taping it down with gum tape. But I'm just using this now just to sort of not waste anything, and as a practice. So the first colour I'm going to start on now is, if I just zoom back in a bit. Okay, so I'm going to use some raw umber, quite dilute, and let's just drop that all over. I'm not making it a perfect application, I want it quite organic looking. Okay, then into that straight away, I think I'll pop in a little bit of this Winsor Yellow, again quite dilute, and I'll add that to the sort of bottom of the cup, you know, and the right hand side of it there. Gives the mushroom a little bit of a glow. Then I'm going to rinse my brush and pick up now some burnt sienna. It's a bit of a rich colour now, so we'll have some contrast going on the cap, sorry, the cap, not the cup of the mushroom. Okay, so this is a lot stronger, as you can see, okay? But everything now is going to bleed because we're painting wet into wet. this is where we wet the paper, and then anything we drop on will just bleed in gradually. I'm going to drop a bit of a shadow there on the right hand side as well. Before I go much further, I'm just going to tip the whole thing and let that bleed gently. Let the water on the surface of the painting take these initial colour washes across, and they just bleed in softly there. And I'm going to add a little bit of that mix of raw umber and a bit of French ultramarine blue. It's a very soft grey. I'm going to just drop that near the base. Like that. If you want things to blend a bit more, just take a moist brush like I've got here and just sort of do a straddling effect. Just helps things to blend in a little bit more. Okay, and I'm going to just stop there and let that dry. Okay, so now I want to start putting in a much stronger shadow on this right hand side of the stalk. I've turned my painting around because I'm going to find it easier to work this way. So this is bone dry now, okay? So the shadow colour, I'm going to mix up a puddle of, let's have the raw umber again. Okay, raw umber, much stronger now than the initial mix that we had for that first grey, remember? And then a bit of French ultramarine blue. See, that's quite a strong shadow colour. So I'm going to be dropping that colour on, and then I'm going to be using a moist brush, a smaller one, this is a size 3, that I've just flicked. I'm not wiping that, I want to keep that moist. So that'll help me soften this colour as it goes on. So I'm just going to drop this shadow colour about a third of the way across the width of this mushroom, okay? And soften it straight away with this moist brush. So I'm going to press the hairs of the brush down quite low, and I'm touching into the extreme edge, can you see, of this shadow piece. I'm not going in deep to the shadow colour, keeping the hairs pressed flat, rotating the brush all the way down, and then you've got a nice soft blend in. Okay, actually let's just pop a little bit more shadow right under there, because it would be darker, wouldn't be getting much light under there as well, where the cap might be casting a shadow. I'm going to rinse my small brush again, rinse it, flick it, and then soften that down as well. Okay, so there's a bit of shadow there. Right, now I'd like a few sort of striations and a bit more texture on the stalk. Okay, so I'm putting these on wet on dry, and again rinse that small size 3 brush and just flick it. There's a bit of moisture in there which will help me just run over some of those marks I just made, just to soften them in a bit more. Okay, then what I'd like is a little hot bounce of warm light coming in there. So I'm using burnt sienna and just drop that in on that sort of bulge at the bottom and taper it up a little bit, just to suggest some warm light bounce and to make that stump a bit more interesting, the stalk, sorry. Okay, and again I'll just blend that in with this little moist brush. Another thing I'd like to have is a little speck of this Winsor Yellow, quite strong, but enough water to make it dilute, and drop that right under there, under the cup, to suggest some light bounce up from the ground, the forest floor. Okay, so now let's work on the cap. So I just turn that round a bit, bring that in. Okay, so the cap now, we can start adding, let's have some strong burnt sienna and a tiny bit of French ultramarine blue. Oh, it's a bit too dark, right? More burnt sienna. Let's make it more conker coloured. Speck of water from the palette. I like lots of droplets of water on my palette to be able to just drag in some tiny bit more moisture if I need, rather than dipping it in the jug, okay? So this cap now, let's get a bit of more strength on this. So I'm just placing this stronger burnt sienna, and it's a bit more viscous, not so runny as the first wash, on the mushroom. And I'm going to rinse that. And as I did with the stump, I'm going to touch in, rotate, and just soften that passage. A bit more. And then with some burnt sienna on the brush, I'm just going to, it's a bit too runny, bring up a few little strokes, you know, to suggest a bit more texture on the mushroom. I'm dragging the brush, I'm holding it parallel to the paper, dragging, and then using the tip of the brush now just to give a few little grooves, you know, in the cap, and softening that hard edge a bit more. Let's drop in a bit more burnt sienna into the topmost bit there, make it a bit richer, okay? And I'm just going to do a few little spots now. So this is practically almost neat burnt sienna, just to have a few little stripes and tops there. And the same again in the base, a bit of texture. Now that yellow that I dropped in earlier on hasn't settled in so well, so with this moist size 3 brush again, I'm just going to brush that away so that it's not so yellow. It didn't look as nice as I thought it would look. Okay. Right, so to finish now, I'm going to go for the burnt sienna and a little bit of French ultramarine blue again. And this time I'm going to accentuate, you know, the frill or the edge of the cap in places, thicker in places, thinner in others. And with these little curvy strokes, just to give us the feel of that curving cap there. And a bit more dark there. So a bit more of that French ultramarine blue and the burnt sienna at this bottom right hand curve of the mushroom. And same again, let's have just a couple more of those little folds and crevices that you see on the stalks of mushrooms, and maybe a few little gills there, you know, you don't have to overdo it. A couple of gills. Let's just drag that up a bit and make it a bit more messy on the base, as if the little not roots, but there's little bits that come out of the bottom of mushrooms where they've been taking up sustenance from the ground. Okay, and I think we'll call it a day with that. Thanks for watching.